My name's Hannah Dalmat. I'm Director of Partnership Development here at Concordia, and I'm so pleased to bring the Concordia community together with two of our former speakers, each doing extraordinary things in their own right, but together saving lives in Concordia's home city of New York. Before we get started, apologies for the backdrop. Before we get started and turn to Nate and Michael, I want to take a moment to ground this discussion in Concordia's mission of strengthening and supporting the partnership ecosystem. Now is a critical time for cross-sector collaboration, public-private partnerships, and a unified world. And that's why Concordia is reaffirming its unwavering commitment to maintaining its position as a leading nonpartisan convener alongside the UN General Assembly. And while the unprecedented nature of the virus is calling for a temporary increase in physical distance, it doesn't mean we can't still come together. This virtual discussion on the role of partnerships on the front lines of the global response to the pandemic is designed for our member community, especially those building partnership-based interventions to support local, national, and global health and service responses. Concordia's Department of Partnership Development is ready to support the formation and structure of new local and global initiatives, contributing to the response through impactful and transformational partnerships. I encourage you to connect directly with me or any of my team members before, during, or after this call if Concordia can support your work. We're also still planning to host the largest and most inclusive event alongside the UN General Assembly in New York this September, whether virtual or in person, and I hope we have the opportunity to welcome you to this 10th annual summit. We're designing influential and substantial programming dedicated to a global response to COVID-19's immediate devastation and aftermath, and I encourage you to connect with our Director of Programming, Kevin Wenzel, who's also on this call, if you wish to be part of that programming process. Finally, Concordia is a membership-based organization. If you were invited to this program by Concordia, World Central Kitchen, or the Office of Assemblyman Blake due to the relevancy of your work to this topic, welcome. I encourage you to consider Concordia membership and be part of this global partnership-based transformation. Community lies at the heart of all we do. As we navigate this complex and tumultuous time together, we're focusing on what we do best, building strong networks, bridging partnerships for social impact, and fostering a community to better the world. While it feels at times like life has been put on hold, at Concordia we're doing everything we possibly can to strengthen our community and double down on our values of collaboration, partnership, and unity. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick off and get into this real conversation. This is also for those of you joining via your computer, you will also see this in the chat feature. So welcome to Concordia Live. We're happy to have you join us remotely for this important discussion, and here are just a few best practices that we've honed along the way. Everybody, when they join, is muted upon entry. You've probably noticed that. So to ask a question during Q&A, we do want to hear from you. Simply raise your hand. There's a little feature there, and Concordia will unmute you. If you prefer to ask your question virtually, we have that Q&A block that you can just type your question in. People can also see that question, then upvote it and engage in that way as well. We do encourage either raising your hand or using the Q&A feature as opposed to the chat, because the chat can get a bit messy. Concordia will be monitoring that chat feature though, and from time to time we'll be putting relevant resources about Concordia or the work of our partners in there, so keep an eye for that additional information. We'll have a poll towards the end of the conversation, and we hope you complete it because it helps us design content of interest to you, our member community. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this webinar is being recorded. It will be accessible via the Concordia website for future viewing, and we encourage you to share it with your network as well. The Q&A portion, however, will not be recorded. That is a member benefit, and so only you joining live right now are able to access it. Okay, so turning to today's discussion. As of this moment and the latest data, there are over 1.5 million COVID-19 cases globally and over 150,000 cases in the state of New York alone. This is a sombering number, but we know it could be much higher due to uneven testing capabilities and access levels. With us today, we have Nate Mook. He's CEO of World Central Kitchen, where he oversees the global emergency and disaster relief efforts of the organization. He's also a storyteller and filmmaker, which should make him a fantastic person to interview today. Assemblyman Michael Blake represents New York's 79th district, which includes the South Bronx, and he leads with a focus on economic development, education, and equality for all. He's also the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, but we won't grill him on national politics or his own 2020 congressional campaign in this particular conversation. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Nate for an overview of World Central Kitchen's work in the US and the Chefs for America initiative in particular. We'll then hear from Michael to share more about the program specifically in the Bronx and the role of local businesses and community members before turning it into a conversation centered around partnerships. Thank you, and over to you, Nate.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Hannah, and the Concordia team. Honored to be here, especially with our partner, Assemblyman Blake, who we've been working with in New York for almost a month now. So I'll step back a little bit, give a little bit of context to World Central Kitchen and what we're doing. We are, as was mentioned, we're a nonprofit organization focused on getting food to folks in need after disasters, both natural and man-made, as long as working on long-term food security issues. So we've worked extensively after hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, here in the United States and all over the world. And our organization was founded by a chef named Jose Andres, who you may have heard of. And he's usually the one talking. Right now, he is in New York City, visiting a number of our initiatives around the city, probably heading to the Bronx soon, Mike. So maybe you'll spot him. But World Central Kitchen has been working on our COVID-19 response now for quite a while, for about over 2 months. We were asked to come out to Japan when the cruise ship was quarantined out there, the Diamond Princess cruise ship. You might have seen it on the news. They had crew and guests that were quarantined, and World Central Kitchen came in. We sent a team out to help manage that operation, to get food prepared safely as the virus was spreading, to get it to the ship and to get it delivered to the guests and the crew that were unable to leave their cabins. And sort of we had to learn a lot in the process. We've certainly dealt with health crises before. After last year, after the cyclones rather, hit Mozambique, we activated an operation there and dealt with a cholera outbreak in Mozambique. But this is very different because, you know, this is a virus that spreads very rapidly and spreads through the air and isn't just only about the sanitation issues. So we had a whole lot of things that we had to learn in the process, develop new protocols. And so we were in Japan for a number of weeks and then ended up back in California dealing with another cruise ship that ended up docking in Oakland, another Princess cruise ship that was facing the COVID-19 issues. And so again, further refining our protocols and our teams learning how to respond in this capacity. And of course, the virus then came to the United States and started to spread rapidly. And so we launched our Chefs for America initiative, where we were activating teams across the country to be able to get food to those who needed it most. The way that we look at this is, yes, it's a health crisis that has turned into an economic crisis as we have millions of Americans out of work. I think the current number is like 17 million Americans right now out of work, and families are struggling to put food on their table. And it in turn has become a humanitarian crisis, because if families can't afford food, that is a big problem. We have workers who are hourly workers that have lost their job. We have salaried workers that have been laid off. The entire restaurant community in general right now is devastated. And it's only going to get worse in the coming weeks before it gets better. Even as we tackle the health challenges and perhaps start to see some of that curve flattening, we're also going to have to continue this social distancing. Businesses are going to need to be shut down. Our economy is going to be on hold, which means that a lot of folks are not going to have access to food. And that's what we're really focused on. So at World Central Kitchen, what we're doing is we're focused on preparing fresh meals. So these are meals that can get to families. They could be hot, but they don't have to be hot. They could be cold meals that are packaged up, that can be taken home by families and eaten later. But we're very complementary to what the food banks are doing. You know, you might be hearing in places like New York City, you've got organizations like City Harvest, nationally. There's the Food Bank Network that falls under Feeding America. And those food banks are doing incredible work of getting, grocery boxes and packages to folks. But not everybody can cook. They don't always have the opportunity, the ability to cook. And one box of ingredients is not going to last for everybody. And that's where we're coming in with those fresh meals. So right now we're working across the country. We started heavily in New York City, working with Assemblyman Blake, who helped us get our operation off the ground. And the way that we're approaching this, because it's very different from a traditional natural disaster, right? Where you have a hurricane that hits a central place and geographically, and you can sort of get all of those resources to that central place. This is a crisis, an emergency, a disaster that's hitting everywhere. It is across the board, and it's in the big cities and the small towns, and nobody is spared. And so we have to really take an approach that really can be distributed. And the only way to do that is by working with incredible local partners on the ground who know their communities. World Central Kitchen isn't going to be able to go in everywhere and know how to reach the most vulnerable families, or seniors that can't leave their homes, the kids that aren't going to school that may not be getting all the meals that they need that they would normally be getting. And so we're partnering with folks all across the country. And it's looking a little bit different depending on where we are. In Los Angeles, for example, we've partnered with the school district, and we're distributing about 40,000 meals per day, fresh meals per day, in addition to what the school district is doing with breakfast and lunch. In Little Rock, Arkansas, we have an operation going with the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Center there, where we are preparing meals out of our own kitchen facility that we've partnered with, that we're cooking the meals ourselves, because it's a smaller community that we're able to do that with. In New York City, we have a large production kitchen through one of our partners where we're preparing over 30,000 meals a day that we're distributing, not with the schools, but at local community distribution sites. And Mike will talk a little bit more about that a bit later. But another big piece of where we're headed right now, and this is what we're trying to get to, is we're in a very interesting position in this country where there's a lack of access to food. But there is a lot of food, right? There hasn't been a hurricane that's taken out buildings. Their electricity is still operational. Our water system is still functional. So places can still cook. Our restaurants can cook. They just don't have anybody to cook for. And on the other hand, we have a population that really needs food, that doesn't have access to food or can't afford food because they've lost their job and they haven't gotten a paycheck now. So this is sort of the next phase of what we're doing, and what we're working with Mike on as well, is how do we reactivate those restaurants to feed America during this time of crisis, put folks back to work, and in the process, get food out to those that need it most. So that's really what we're sort of the next phase of what Chefs for America and World Central Kitchen is working on right now with our amazing partners. And I'm sure you're going to hear from Mike about some of that work specifically in New York City and the Bronx right now.
What up? What up? That is a way to give you some the Bronx energy, everybody. Good afternoon. First and foremost, everyone, I just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. And to my dear friend and brother, Nate, incredibly grateful to you and to Jose and everyone for believing in us. This is an indication of what happens when people prepare for the moment before you get to the moment, because we were all down in Puerto Rico. Our teams were down there engaging months ago. And then when this all happened, I reached out and they immediately say yes. So I just have to continue to say that we are indebted to World Central Kitchen and their team. For everyone that I'm seeing again, Michael Blake, I had the honor, thanks to Hannah and so many others, to speak on the main stage last year, and then on the other stages the years prior for Concordia. Allow me to very briefly set the tone and then communicate the opportunity of how we're progressing. The Bronx. The Bronx is the most diverse county in America. We have an 89.7% likelihood that any two people you meet in the Bronx will be a different ethnicity. The Bronx has the largest West African population in the world outside of West Africa. We are a community that has for too long been the poorest congressional district in the country. In a 31 block radius, we have 108 schools in the South Bronx. It is a space where it's really hard to process the magnitude of the moment. And something that we have been saying regularly is while there is a coronavirus pandemic that is happening that we cannot ignore, as we are unfortunately watching the death toll rise by the day, where the Bronx death rate, it's kind of hard to just process this, you know. The Bronx death rate is 2 times that of New York City. Bronx death rate is 3 times that of Manhattan. That we are in a space where there was a pandemic of poverty before coronavirus hit our shore. And in large part, what we are watching in real time is that people are consistently still determining that I have to go outside because I need a meal. You know, they're willing to risk illness. They're willing to risk the challenges because they're hungry. And so what we've been able to do with WCK is a multitude of things. We have past 250,000 meals we've been able to do in the Bronx alone. Today, we reached our high water mark thus far of 61 sites that we're providing food in the Bronx. And when people, again, just to internalize this, the Bronx has 1.5 million people in just one county. I just want us to underscore the size of what we're dealing with here. And so we're still growing by the day. This is for public housing developments, where we have the second largest public housing in America within our district. This is a community where this past Saturday, running water was not running for 2,000 residents for 9 hours. So just process this. The main thing you're being told is to wash your hands. If for 9 hours you couldn't, it leads again to that pandemic of poverty. But within that, you have people like Danny Barber, who is the president of the Citywide Council of Presidents, who's been going to multiple stops to make sure we can feed our residents within public housing. We've been able to partner up with some of the schools because several of the schools didn't have sufficient resources for their grab and go. We were able to expand and collaborate with community organizations such as The Point or Dream Yard, which is one of our local educational entities, where they had a line around the block. On the first day, we said there were 75 meals we would get to them, and it has grown by the day because how many people are showing up. We've been able to now expand and focus on what's going on with our small businesses. And again, in partnership with World Central Kitchen and with Here to Here and so many other entities, we've now been able to bring on multiple local restaurants back online, Bronx Draft House, Bistro, Bricks and Hops, Mont Haven Bar and Grill, et cetera, to be able to not only rehire people who needed to have job opportunities again, but also make sure that we're providing some economic opportunities that otherwise were not going to be happening. And so it's about how do we help the first responders? How do we help our health professionals? Some of you saw some of the nurses at several of our Bronx hospitals who are demanding and needing more N95 masks. You know, they're working 16, 18-hour shifts. They don't have the time to go outside. And so we've been able to expand in that way as well. And so, again, for context, this is the moment that we're in. And this is the moment that we find ourselves in. People are hungry and they need our help. And so if you go to wck.org/news/the Bronx, again, one more time, wck.org/news/the Bronx, you'll be able to see the sites where we all have been going. If you go to our social media handles, WC Kitchen being their Instagram and Twitter handles, or to mine, which is MR Mike Blake, every day we're putting up the site where people can go get meals. And lastly, Hannah, before we open it up for discussion, in collaboration with Nate and so many others, we are literally within minutes about to push send on a Bronx community relief effort that many of us have been working through, which we're very excited about. So you go to thebronx.org. The website is now live. You'll see a great quote there from Nate as well. And as part of that, and this is part of the Concordia spirit, what happened with World Central Kitchen led to people coming in to help us in the Bronx at larger scales that they were not before. And so the Bronx Community Relief Effort, we will be able to announce that the James and Judy Diamond Foundation is putting in $3 million out the gate to be able to help us help our people on the ground, with food being the number one of the 8 priorities there. And so when Chef Andres and others, when they come up to the Bronx, we'll be able to show them The epicenter of the pain has been the Bronx, but the epicenter of the promise will be the Bronx as well. So I'll turn back over to you.
I think that's great. And thank you, Assemblyman Blake, for sharing so much about the reasons perhaps why communities like the Bronx warrant a more robust partnering strategy to overcome some of those systemic barriers and disparities that exist, to ensure that there is a more equal and a fully robust and inclusive response for COVID-19. So kudos to you and the 61 groups that you're working with as a distribution sites, everybody who's been a part of building the Bronx relief effort, because it's surely needed and truly, truly inspiring to see the energy going into it. I want to take just a few moments. One of the goals with this series is, of course, to show people how to partner, to tease out some of those steps that both World Central Kitchen and Assemblyman Blake, you and your office have taken for such a robust response so that people can bring this back to their own community. So let's just start there. How did this get started? Who called who? How did we get Jose Andres into the Bronx and working with groups like the Bistro?
Me begging Nate. If we want the very real answer, it was Nate, you all are friends of ours. And, look, and I'm not just saying this because we're on this line. I think what's happened here is the beauty of Concordia in many ways, where people who have been doing good work over the years came together. Very fast anecdote, because I know time is limited. When I was down in Puerto Rico, there was a press conference happening that the governor was organizing after the earthquakes. And I turned to my left, and completely unplanned, the World Central Kitchen team was actually standing to my left. And we had been on emails for days and had not met yet. And to me, that was perfect synergy. So once this all began, and to Nate's point, which is absolutely right, we had that dual synergy where there are people who have food, there are restaurants, there are employees, and that connection was not happening. We were able to leverage their brilliance in operation, and said, look, we know who the outlets are on the ground. We just need support to get there. I said it to them on social media, and also I want to say it aloud. Their work. Robert Smith, a dear fraternity brother of mine, his support of that $1 million donation to World Central Kitchen helps immensely. What Leonardo DiCaprio and others are doing with America's Food Fund, it helps immensely. This is going to go a while. I want people to understand this. Governor Cuomo said something today that I think is very real. The Spanish flu had 3 waves to it. And we need people to really internalize that even if you see hospitalizations declining, unfortunately, Dr. Fauci called this weeks ago, the death rate is increasing. And it's leading to a scenario where Mayor de Blasio and others are saying we may be on essentially a city shutdown through May. And so we just need people to understand that the dichotomy is happening there. But no, this all began by me reaching out, and thank God to Nate and Chef Andres that they said yes.
If you have a logistics problem, there are 2 numbers you want in your phone. And one is probably the CEO of UPS, and the other is Nate's, right? Those are the people you want to be calling, because World Central Kitchen's logistics system and understanding of how to get things across the table and out the door in a short amount of time, and it's just extraordinary everywhere they go. So Nate, in reacting to that, you got called up. You had to then work with your team to think through bandwidth, think through operationalization, think through the resources required to meaningfully go into this community. One thing World Central Kitchen always does is really, it goes in and it stays. And so it's no small heft to say, I'm going to go to the Bronx and do something, because that is a commitment of a certain magnitude. How did you have that conversation internally? What kind of approvals or incentives did you need to have checked off before you could be up and running?
Yeah, it kind of just all came together, right? There's these certain moments in time where just this like cross section of magic happens, and to move very quickly. We obviously were gearing up to be able to support the response even before things started to be shut down. We knew this was coming, and as Assemblyman Blake mentioned, like we really we had to be prepared. We had to get ready, because when people lose their jobs, they still have to eat, right? They don't eat in a week or a month. They have to eat now. And so, you know, we were starting to put the pieces in place, and we had an amazing, generous offer from philanthropist Robert Smith. You may remember he gave a commencement speech at Morehouse University, and, you know, said, I've paid off all your student loans. You know, he is such a generous soul, and he reached out and said, are you guys getting ready to mobilize in New York? It's looking like it could be bad here. You know, I want to support. And we said, we would love to. We're getting all the pieces together. And Mike reached out and emailed like the same day and said, hey, you know, I'd love to get some things going in the Bronx. You know, I know we are already vulnerable. And I think this is so, I can't emphasize this enough, that in disasters, in emergencies, whether it's natural disasters or pandemics in this case, it is the marginalized and the vulnerable communities that are hit exponentially worse in these situations, right? They do not have the ability to sustain without going to work. They don't have access to a whole bunch of food that they can hoard and put in their fridges and last them for weeks on end, right? I know everybody, you know, everybody was saying, this is coming, like go to the grocery store and stock up for 2 weeks. You need to last 14 days. A lot of our country can't do that. You know, and, you know, just the basics, right? I mean, 2,000 people or 2,000 households without water for 9 hours. I mean, this is what happens, and these are the communities that are hit the hardest. And so Mike reached out and said, hey, we need to be ready. We brought those pieces together. We have an incredible team at World Central Kitchen of incredibly dedicated of folks that have not had a break recently, unfortunately. One of our team members, Sam Block, was in the Bahamas for many months. Ended up going out to Australia to respond to the wildfires there, was on his way back from Australia when we got the phone call about COVID in Japan, went to Japan, came back straight to Oakland, and was in Los Angeles. And I talked to Mike, and that night I called up Sam and I said, Sam, I need you in the Bronx. We need to get things rolling there. The next morning, he took a red eye at like 11 a.m. the next day, was in the Assemblyman's office, and we started to build our team. And we've got an amazing team, and obviously an amazing force of chefs and of folks in New York that we've been able to activate. And that's just kind of how it works. You know, within 24 hours, we were mobilized and ready to go. And really, of course, relying on this partnership to know how to get food. And you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that Jose sometimes says about World Central Kitchen is, you know, it's not the cooking that matters, it's the logistics. Because if you cook, you know, it doesn't matter if the folks aren't getting the food, if the families, if the children, if the seniors aren't receiving that food, there's no point in cooking. And so for us, it was about, okay, let's figure out how we can reliably get the meals in, you know, set up the operations, expand to reach, and start small. We didn't start with 61 locations, right? Let's start with a few locations and then scale it up from there. And that's really been our approach from day one.
That's great. I'm going to turn it to a Q&A with the audience if people have questions that they want to submit. But before doing so, I want to synthesize one real lesson that I just got from Nate and Assemblyman Blake about partnerships, and of course, provide a thank you to everybody who's watching online to learn these lessons as well. And that's around partnerships. So with regard to World Central Kitchen, you're in a special space. You do have this amazing platform, reputation. People pick up the phone when Chef Andres or others call, right? And so that's a unique value out of World Central Kitchen. But for those nonprofits that are part of this response space and maybe don't have that same exposure, there are a few things that they should know in terms of accessing partnerships. And one is certainly you need the resources. It's amazing to have large donors like Robert Smith, but also just in terms of your own network, you need the donors, but just as important as the money is you need that outlet. And that's where, again, the Office of Assemblyman Blake was so pivotal to the actual success on the ground and to communicating back to the donors why you're the right steward for that donation. So you need to not only have the resources, but also the network, the capability to distribute on the ground. And I think that's just a key lesson for partners, because they often focus, I think, a bit on the resources. without actually, again, thinking about the implementation of it.